everybody. Welcome to the VeriDAO channel. Today we have co-founder of the Bearing Asset Fund and most known for in the crypto world for his role starting Uphold. Welcome, Mr. Bill Laggner, to the VeriDAO channel, and of course, the one and only Reggie Middleton. Welcome, Reggie. Good to have you here today with us. And Bill, thanks so much for joining us. We are really excited to learn your history with Veritaseum and with your good friend, Reggie Middleton. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you have a really unusual story. I did some homework from finance to full-time crypto. You graduated from Florida in the 80s with a degree in finance, honors no less. Began your career at Fidelity before going out on your own in 98 to short the tech bubble, followed by co-founding the Bearing Asset Fund in Texas. So there was a time when traditional finance would scoff at Bitcoin. But you seem to be a little bit of a risk taker. When did Bitcoin kind of come across your radar?
Well, just kind of going back to the Bearing Fund. So when we started the fund in 2002, we were big buyers of gold. We were basically looking at the world after the tech bubble and watching how central planners would respond. And of course, they responded by lowering interest rates and printing money. This is standard operating procedure that's been going on for decades. And, gold to me is money. Gold's always been money. It's no one else's liability. And so we had quite a bit of gold. We were buying tech companies for basically the cash they had in the bank. And then it was pretty clear that we were going to segue to another bubble, which was the credit bubble, which is how I found Reggie. We shorted the credit bubble and put together the Bearing Credit Bubble Index. And just through a series of basically forensic accounting and how central banks were manipulating the economy, we capitalized on the collapse of that. And then I was introduced to Bitcoin in 2010 in New York. And the guy that introduced it to me is a long-time friend. I did not take him seriously. So that's the most expensive lunch of my entire life. And then it took me about a year and a half to 2 years after that. We were actually celebrating the collapse of the credit bubble with a number of Austrian, economic thinkers and contrarians. And I could see that the central bank was going to go all in. Like they had taken interest rates to 0, quantitative easing 3, I believe, was underway. And it was clear that they were going to do everything imaginable to try and reflate the economy, including growing the balance sheets collectively, the central bank balance sheets by, unfathomable numbers. And so I got involved in Bitcoin in 2012. So that was the first purchase and, me rereading the white paper and taking it seriously.
Wow. So you were mentioning the comparison of the credit bubble and the central banks being all in on the economy there. That has to kind of mimic where we are right now.
Yeah, I would say today, let's just say this. So the Ben Bernanke rescue mission has essentially created all of these intended and unintended consequences, one of which is allowing government to grow at multiples of the real economy over a long period of time, let's say the last 12 years, 13 years. And really what's happened is the governments have figured out a way to use the central banks to socialize the cost of credit and to distort things beyond anything I could have ever imagined. I mean, what is the real economy? No one really knows because there's so much credit that's been created out of thin air. And I think it's the main reason why so many people around the world are so disenfranchised with their quote unquote respective leaders, because there's nothing really connecting what governments are doing with their central banks and people's underlying economic activities.
Interesting. So when you learned about that credit bubble, you said that's when you found out about Reggie. I know that you have been a subscriber to the Boom Bust blog. Was that where you met Reggie Middleton and found out about Reggie Middleton?
Yeah, it was, and just so everyone knows, like we were getting research from some of the smartest people around the world. I mean, I can give you a list of some of the big macro funds, and when I was traveling around the country and trying to understand how distorted this private sector credit bubble was, and reading Reggie's work, it was pretty apparent that the work his shop was putting out was so far superior to anything I was getting, either from Wall Street or off of Wall Street. And this is globally. So I'm all about intellectual honesty, and I just want the truth. Just give me the truth. Whether I want to hear the truth or not, give me the truth. And so it was obvious that the work they were doing was not only truthful, but it was very detailed, very detailed. And so that's when I reached out to Reggie, and we started having dialogue. And this is well before the bubble burst, but just kind of confirming everything that was playing out on stage.
So would that have been his call on the Bear Stearns collapse?
That would have been Reggie made a number of fantastic calls. Bear Stearns, okay. Liam. I mean, there's a long list of phenomenal calls. Yeah, these are some of the best calls, by the way, of the last 30 years.
Wow.
Thank you, Bill. But honestly, it was one call that we searched and replaced for about 45 to 80 companies. So, but yeah. Thank you for making me sound smart, but
look, they're very thorough across a whole variety of bad actors in the private sector, and he was doing it in New York. I was in Texas, so he's in the belly of the beast, right? He's watching it happen right in real time, right around him.
Yeah, what would you say the most impactful analysis that you discovered during that time was?
That's a good question. Well, I think just kind of confirming the size of the frauds that were being committed, and then the role that the central bank and then government agencies, Fannie and Freddie, were basically playing in propagating this mortgage illusion, right? This kind of whole real estate mortgage credit illusion. I mean, a lot of the collateral had rolled over in 2016. But the fact that, between Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac expanding their balance sheets and essentially assisting the banks in this fraud, these series of frauds, it was the confirmation, I think, across a swath of these companies that led me to realize that this is much bigger than I originally anticipated.
Interesting. So tell me a little bit more about your history and relationship with Reggie during that time. I know you were following him on the Boom Bust blog and reached out to him when you're hearing his analysis. But what did you think when you first heard about Veritaseum and Reggie's IP and ideas for peer-to-peer capital markets?
Yeah, it's interesting, how the universe unfolds. I went through all my emails before this call because I reached out to Reggie. We know some of the same people, and I said, look, I'm going to basically invest in this guy that was one of the founders of Salesforce.com. He's starting this wallet platform, and at the time, the only way to really, as an American, to buy Bitcoin was Coinbase or some local meetup groups and so on. And I reached out to Reggie, and I was in the process of trying to kind of get Reggie to speak to the founders of BitReserve, mainly Halsey Minor. And at the time, Halsey and BitReserve were talking to a group in Portugal about acquiring some IP and kind of building out the wallet interface. And so Reggie at the time also was, in the process of applying for his patents, this idea of peer-to-peer, capital markets. And I would see him on CNBC and so forth. So we stayed in touch. What had happened was BitReserve was in the process of raising capital. I ended up starting an entity to help finance the Series A round of financing for BitReserve. and get kind of a product to the market. The biggest challenge at the time was getting people in the European Union and America just to connect their banks or payment rails to crypto. It was the same problem Coinbase was facing and others were facing, which was how do you get money out of the old world into this new, blockchain world. So that's when Reggie and I started communicating. I was unfortunately one of a series of shareholders at BitReserve. I became the first outside board member. And when you're one board member sitting in a room with, 5 other board members, 6 other board members, you only have a voice and you've got to get consensus. So I think at the time it was early. Everyone was distracted and everyone was trying to solve this one main problem, which was how do you connect the old legacy system to the new system, which was what we were trying to do back in 2013, 14, 15.
And so was that your launch into, did that transition into Uphold?
Yeah, we changed. Uphold? Yeah, we ended up, what happened was the company ended up, in 2015, it ended up investing in a bank, correspondent bank in the US, and that allowed the Uphold, and changed the name to Uphold, and allowed the Uphold wallet platform to connect to the US monetary system, bank system.
Interesting. I'm trying to think. Let's see. Recently, the SEC told Coinbase to delist everything but Bitcoin. They refused to give an explanation. It seems like the lack of clarity from regulators is really a stumbling block for a lot of tech companies in America. Did you face a lot of challenges when you were helping to launch or establish Uphold?
We did. I think initially what we were focused on was just trying to connect banking systems in Europe and the US with, basically we had, I think at the time, 45 different fiat currencies. We had gold, silver. So I was helpful in getting the company to launch gold through our Swiss gold custodian that we had when I was at Baring. And we had Bitcoin, and I think we had Ethereum and whatever that was, 16. But at the time, it was just trying to get traditional rail systems to connect to digital forms of value, right? And doing it with this idea that we were not going to rehypothecate your collateral, and we would show assets and liabilities in real time. We are, by the way, I think we're still the only, Reggie may correct me on this, the only wallet company to show assets and liabilities in real time. We've been doing that for 7 years now.
Wow. And you're full-time crypto now, correct?
Yeah, I've been in the space investing since 2012 initially personally, and then through another vehicle that I manage, variety of kind of crypto infrastructure projects.
Yeah, that's really unusual. I mean, like I was saying, it seems like there was this. I remember watching some of the documentaries, where they were on Wall Street trying to hand out Bitcoin, and people wouldn't touch it. It was just this considered this taboo thing in the finance world, and to see you make this transition to really embrace it, it's interesting to think or see how the world is embracing it when there's so much distrust in government currencies and all this. What effects do you see playing out for tech innovation in the US, given some of these challenges that we're seeing with regulation?
Yeah, I was in Portugal for a month, and I had a number of business meetings there, and then I was in Switzerland. I can say the following. I think the U.S. regulators will not have a choice. The U.S. regulators are going to have to embrace all of this. And the reason is because the rest of the world is embracing it. Singapore, Japan, Switzerland, EU, the UK, Brazil of late. So, and Russia. The beauty is competition drives the best in everything. You pick the sport, you pick business. Competition is a wonderful thing. It creates choices. It creates pricing. It creates mutual exchange. It creates better actors. It creates innovation. And unfortunately, the U.S. Has operated in a system or a set of systems where competition is quite limited, depending on the industry. And the reason is because government has allowed many of these industries to basically be captured, regulatory capture. Look at Wall Street. The difficulty in trying to start a broker-dealer or launch something that's innovative, that's better for humanity, right? And so the rest of the world is embracing all this, and they've actually created quite a bit of clarity in and around these different types of cryptographic, protocols and so forth. And yet the U.S. is still playing like we're back in the 1980s and early 1990s. It's ridiculous.
I guess that goes into my next question. Do you believe that the crypto ecosystem would be able to protect a retail system retail investor, through self-governance or self-governance mechanism?
Well, Reggie knows this because we've chatted about it. I've met a variety of actors in the space, and it was very evident to me early on that many of these people, should not even be out in public. I mean, whether it's Celsius or BlockFi, these people were rehypothecating people's collateral. FTX was the cherry on the sundae. I think the industry, I've been saying this for 6 years, the industry has to agree on a set of standards that A, deliver more transparency, and B, create levels of accountability and or penalties for bad actors. Think about it. You have all these bad actors that have committed some pretty egregious crimes over the last 6 years. I haven't seen anybody go to jail. I haven't seen them have to return. It's funny. I'm old enough to remember the S&L crisis and the RTC. And I remember all these S&Ls being essentially taken over by the government. And the government actually did a fairly decent job of taking the assets, creating RTC, and selling off the assets. And I actually bid on some assets back in 1990 from Silverado Savings and Loan. And the beauty there was it was a hit to GDP. I think it was like 4.5% of GDP. But it cleared the field. And unfortunately, in crypto, and I don't know why, but these people keep getting bamboozled by bad actors, and the bad actors are able to raise capital. To me, it's mind blowing. I think BlockFi, Reggie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they raised like $500 million over 4 or 5 years. And I remember meeting the founder, and I said, I would never give you my Bitcoin because I know you're going to rehypothecate it. And that's exactly what they were doing. So I actually tried to short some of these companies because I spent a lot of time shorting not just financial frauds, but frauds in general. That's something I've really loved doing, and calling out bad actors, ridding the market of bad actors. That's what short sellers do, by the way.
Awesome.
And I tried to borrow shares of BlockFi, and I couldn't do that, but I was interested.
Awesome. Well, speaking of frauds, there has been some name calling that I know of. I'm wondering, are you a Veri token holder?
I am not. I remember when Reggie, I was in the middle of about 4 projects. I was spending time in New Zealand in another project that I was an investor in and helping them. But I remember when Reggie launched Veritaseum.
Oh, I was going to ask you if you felt that you were ever frauded by Reggie Middleton.
No, I think Reggie Middleton and the investors that I had in my prior fund would all say that the guy was intellectually honest and help us capitalize and or avoid the carnage of the last bubble created by central planners.
I agree completely. Have you ever been harmed by the actions of the SEC?
Well, that's a good question. Have I been harmed by the SEC? Directly, No, I have not, but I can't say that I've been helped by the SEC.
Interesting. Yeah.
And can I expand on that?
Please do. Please do.
Yeah. So when we ran a fund, right, we were regulated by a number of different groups, SEC being one of them. And the SEC, from time to time, you would have an audit or they would call you in, right, to look at your books and records and so on. I remember meeting with the SEC and, they were looking at some of our marketing materials. Now, at the time, we were only allowed to market to accredited investors. And we were a U.S. fund at the time. And so I went over there, sat down with them, and I realized at that point that it really wasn't marketing to accredited investors. They were just trying to get involved and limit the ability of an entrepreneur to compete against the existing status quo. Now, understand something. This happened after Reggie's group, my group, and some other small group of people, right, shorted the credit bubble and wrote articles, podcasts, et cetera, explaining how these various frauds on the public were playing out. I think it's very important for people to understand this. We had a very active blog at the time. I was a prolific writer along with my ex-business partner. And we were showing the world, as Reggie was, how all these frauds were being committed. Was any regulator stopping any of this? How much money was lost by, I don't know, Reggie, what was the number? How many trillions of dollars of wealth was destroyed, during that period of time? I'd have to go back to my notes. So I would say that it's a group that really just plays along with regulatory capture. I don't see them really doing their job. At times, maybe they've prevented some frauds. I'll give them that. But the best way to create, better environments is through transparency and penalties when you do something that's wrong. Again, the bad actors, whether it's crypto or even Wall Street, I really haven't seen penalties that would deter someone from doing this again. And I could give you a series of examples if you'd like, but basically, you have a situation where there are many public companies, right, that were committing fraud and so forth. They typically pay a small fine. They agree not to do it again, but the damage has been done. They were committing fraud.
Yeah, I think the most blatant one is, just SBF just walking out and them making a statement that they are not going to look into campaign finance corruption. That to me can't be more blatant, that they know who the players are. They know that there's a there, and they're specifically not looking into it. And he's walking out the door. Somebody's not doing their job there, and let me chime. He definitely a bad actor. We can go on talk about that for hours. But shame on the people that were doing business with this group. They didn't even have a board of directors. How do you raise capital? You didn't even have a CFO. You don't have board of directors. How are these people accepting money? And how about shame on the people that invested in that company? There's just no governance. There's literally no governance. No governance.
Maybe
and
some big guys like Sequoia Capital. But
right.
I'll go back to be quiet. So.
No, Reggie, please speak up. You've talked about this before, and actually there's a video that I saw of you at a conference one time where you were challenging a company about their due diligence and how much the crypto world lacks due diligence. Can you speak to that and the importance of that in these companies? And if we're going to, we're talking about governance and protecting investors, which is supposed to be the SEC's job, but what role that is, how important that is.
So much to say, it's not going to fit into a interview, and I'm trying to change my entire persona and not say so many things to get myself in trouble. It's not working, but I just want to ask Bill. So you said that a certain regulatory agency did not directly cost you money, basically. But I postulate, just for the sake of discussion, what the margin multiple expansion would be if there was clarity or lack of opacity in what a security is and a crypto asset and whether it could be traded. Uphold would be worth a whole lot more then than it would be now. You know, so when you say everything, all digital assets are securities except for Bitcoin, but a security is either specifically named in the law or is an investment contract, which means it depends on how it's sold. How can such a statement be said? So making such a, creating such a pall of lack of transparency, which you said transparency is what makes valuable and clear markets. Any significant investment in Uphold, Veritaseum, Coinbase, or anything is devalued by default, simply because you have the primary watchdog in the market and there are no clear rules. Imagine driving through town in Texas or New York, a lot of density, and all the stop signs are just blanked over and all the speeding signs are blanked over. All the traffic lights are all one color. None of those colors are red, green, or yellow. And then you get a raft of speeding tickets and traffic tickets and stoplight tickets. And you say, I wasn't speeding. And the cop says, yes, you are. And we're like, there's no speed limit. Well, all drivers are speeding scofflaws. Everybody who runs past the stop sign is a scofflaw. You simply can't do that and have an efficient market or a market at all. I do understand why it's being done that way, but it's harming everybody except for the established entities who I think were designed to benefit from it. And so they accrue value short term. Everybody loses long term. But that is solely my personal opinion. And I'm not going to name any particular agency, but that's just the way I see things.
So that's a great set of points, Reggie. Let me respond this way. The fact that the financial crisis allowed certain groups to fail and others to be bailed out set a terrible precedent. All of those companies should have gone away. They should have been broken up. Depositors should have been protected. And you should have basically began the surgery to create a much more decentralized set of systems. At the same time, Bitcoin comes onto the scene as basically a competitive way to hold and store value, censorship-free, and compete with this kind of amalgamation of really bad actors. The fact that Reggie Middleton and his group and Baring exposed this in detail and showed the world how much fraud was playing out, and yet no one went to jail. I think a few firms were fined over the next subsequent years, but they were bailed out by the taxpayer. Those groups are now limiting what's happening in crypto. So there's this kind of limitation set of walls that are being created. The regulatory capture is there. Those groups should never even be in existence. So now you have the crypto people trying to innovate, and yet Wall Street's trying to make their way in, and Wall Street is trying to infiltrate crypto, right? And if you look at the regulatory agencies, they've done a fantastic job of just delaying things through opaqueness, right? Legal maneuvers, etc. And so you have this environment where capital is going to flow where it's most respected. That's the bottom line. People will get up and move and take their money and go and behave and act in places where they're respected. And if the U.S. continues to dig in their heels regarding crypto or regulations or whatever they plan on doing to the crypto industry, the rest of the world who's creating clarity is just going to become the recipient of all this capital, human capital, financial capital. And that's how you destroy a country. You basically regulate it and socialize it to death.
Well, I guess in defense of the U.S., The largest financial institution probably in the world has just adopted what is probably the largest crypto program out. And that's Federal Reserve and FedNow. And then there's going to be a lot of crypto people saying, but no, it's not a blockchain, and etc. Everybody who says that, I challenge you to ask them what tech stack FedNow is built upon. And they say, I never thought of that.
Reggie, what is it built on?
I believe it's built on a distributed system that was developed by LinkedIn about 10 years ago.
Wow.
LinkedIn open sourced it, and it's now governed by Apache. And it's a high throughput message streaming system, which happens to have a client that uses asymmetric key pairs. That sounds familiar. It uses distributed messaging. That sounds familiar. And as of recently, throughput is governed by a consensus algorithm. Sounds familiar, right?
Very.
But, you know, facts be damned. Who really cares about facts? You can always opine on whether the Fed is using, you know, crypto or not, etc. But anybody who challenges and says X, Y, and Z, and you can turn around and ask them, so what is it built upon? If they can't give you an immediate answer, you have to dismiss it. Now, this is my opinion based upon my, you know, research, and I'm not nearly as bright as all these other guys, but at least I try. Now, sovereign monetary systems, central banks, their business model is censorship. So, I mean, that's the business model. So a censorship-resistant currency or method of transaction is going to face significant headwinds. Is not the way to put it, not even the way to express it. It's going to face massive resistance, and it's going to either be co-opted or destroyed, because that's the business model of the guys in charge. But if you think about co-opting, I think Wall Street has already, you know, permanently, critically, probably fatally infiltrated the crypto industry. Okay, some of the biggest assets are owned by some of the biggest names. But if I'm right about the Federal Reserve, well, they're taking the technology and they're using it to improve what they currently have. The FedNow system, as it's marketed, is a very efficient system. It does everything that they would need. And why would the U.S. adopt a CBDC when they have 2 to 3 second transactions and several second permanent settlement across borders 24/7? The only thing that's missing from a CBDC would be financial sovereignty, which of course no central bank wants, because that's why they call it a central bank, not decentral bank. So I think the Federal Reserve has everything it would require. I'm not saying they won't issue a CBDC, but I can't think of a reason why right now. And the reason why they're able to do all this is because of decentralized finance technology.
So to clarify, Reggie, I have a few questions. So does that help solve the settlement process with transactions with the US dollar? But we would still have the problem with backing the asset, correct? If they were able to solve the trust issue with backing the asset, how would that change things?
Well, the settlement risk is eliminated because instead of waiting several hours, a day, 3 days, etc., for a transaction to be settled, it's settled within 2 or 3 seconds. I think 2 or 3 seconds is the ceiling for the transaction time through FedNow. The ceiling, that's the maximum potential time. Most of the risk and the need for collateral is to manage risk. If I were to sell $100 million of assets to Bill, and Bill takes 2 days, T+2, which is, you know, traditional, the current settlement time through equities in public markets. He takes 2 days to pay me. Well, that 48 hours, I'm sitting here, you know, biting my nails and sitting on pins, because anything could happen in 48 hours. Bill can have a heart attack before he pays me. One of the middlemen can go out of business. You know, we could have a massive storm, COVID, etc. 2 to 3 seconds takes that 48 hours of worrying and breaks it down to 2 seconds. So if I can wait 2 seconds, I've eliminated the settlement risk. I've eliminated the need for collateral. The way we manage the risk of the 48 hours between the time Bill, the transaction is ended and I'm supposed to get payment, I ask Bill to put money up or some type of capital, and that capital is a collateral to compensate me in case Bill gets hit by a truck, etc. The shorter the settlement time, the less collateral is, or the less time the collateral is needed. If you have sub-second settlement, you know, you have a very, very small amount of collateral needed. And as you have a bunch of transactions going back and forth, you can net those transactions against each other. In other words, I buy something from Bill, Bill buys something from you, you buy something from Bill, and I buy something from you. So we take the lowest common denominator of these transactions, and then we just post that collateral. They're all netted out, and what's not covered is posted. Still over 48 hours, that could be significant. Over a second and a half, 1 second, a quarter of a second, that is a very, very small amount of collateral needed to cover the risk. Okay, think about how fast 1.5 second transaction is. 1 Mississippi, done. So as compared to T+2, if you go to the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. Now, as for backing, that's a totally different conversation. Okay, so we're discussing transacting an asset. What that asset is worth is outside the purview's conversation. Now, the US dollar is not backed by nothing. It's backed by some pretty nasty guns, planes, and aggressive guys in suits behind keyboards, etc. When the conversation of what the US dollar is worth gets too egregious, notice one member of that conversation tends to get burned, blown up, or disappears. And that's what backs the US dollar. But that is hard to quantify unless you get blown up. Then it's easy to quantify, but it's too late, right? And it's very different from backing it with hard assets. And that's when you have the commodities, you know, gold, silver, or you back it with something else that has a tangible value or a perceived tangible value. And remember, it's all about perception. Okay. Gold is most valuable when you have negative real rates. Okay. So a lot of people say, well, interest rates are going down, so gold goes up. No, not really, because it's the real rates that matter. If interest rates go down and inflation goes down at the same time, and then you don't have the empirical arithmetic boost for gold. But interest rates could go up by 50%, and gold can still fly through the roof because inflation goes up by 80%. Did I say that right? Yes, because inflation is the cost and the actual rate. So,
yeah, Reggie, let me just I would agree with everything that Reggie just said. I would add one more thing, which is the fact that, yes, negative real rates, right? That's kind of the fuel for the fire. But the reality, too, that all of the governments are completely insolvent. The deficits to GDP, the size of the central bank balance sheets, we are living in unprecedented times. This is an experiment that's gone so far off the rails. It should have been resolved back in 2009, 2010, but the powers that be did not want that. And so think about this. You had over $20 trillion of negative yielding sovereign debt. How does that happen? How do you have negative yielding sovereign debt when the governments themselves are insolvent? Their cost of borrowing should be 20%. But if Reggie and I have a corporation and we're not doing very well, the cost of borrowing is going to be quite high. It's going to be very high. And so the reality of the matter is that the system is insolvent. And so people, as time goes on here, people are going to figure out ways to leave the system. Bitcoin at $30,000 is just the first experiment in people fleeing the system and experimenting with something that is, quote unquote, non-state value. It's the first of many examples, right? And then we've had a whole series of these examples the last 8 or 9 years. I think that's the reality. We know the elected officials are not listening to the citizens globally. I mean, I was over in Amsterdam, and the day I arrived, they were They were marching at City Hall with the farmers and spraying cow manure on the buildings of City Hall because they were trying to take the farms. People have had enough. People are fed up. And so the question is, knowing that this system is insolvent, and then the cost of refinancing this system, think about it. They've raised rates. Reggie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the fastest increase in overnight interest rates in, what, 25 years or 30 years. You can't do that when there's this much accumulated promises made by central planners the last 30, 40 years. So something's going to break. And I think the reality is that, let's be quite frank here, there's a lot of people trying to segue over to these peer-to-peer systems, but the architecture over here is still a bit suspect, or it's not as ironclad as what someone who would say, you know, I'd rather go own gold or silver because I could have it here or store it there and I know it's there. But with digital assets, right, I think we've had, what, $3 billion of digital assets stolen through bridges and so forth, hacks. So the architecture is still being constructed and or reconstructed, and we're learning. But the reality is that the thing that governments fear the most, and this is what leads to hyperinflation, is when people just flee the system. And I think we're moving closer and closer to that. I don't see any government doing anything remotely close to listening to its citizens and being limited. In fact, the governments are all very unlimited right now.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Reggie.
I think the ECB made a fatal critical error in bringing negative interest rates to popularity. As I remember it, and I'm young, I'll be 56 in about a month, so I'm not old enough to remember everything. But as I remember it, Japan basically pioneered QE. Japan has a very unique economy and financial system. And in my opinion, it's superior to the greater EU, greater Europe. It simply is. That's why they can get away with a very high debt to GDP ratio, because they take that debt and it's bought or purchased by their citizens who simply hold it. It's not purchased by countries across the world. And Japan has a real economy and a very large financial system. And if you think about all the languages they speak in Japan, mostly Japanese, right? If you think of the different financial systems, legal systems, all Japanese, compared to Europe. How many different languages are spoken in Europe? Different cultures, different financial systems, different legal systems. You duct tape that all together, things break, and then you just start dropping interest rates. It's not even a short-term solution. So it's definitely not a long-term solution. In my opinion, there's no such thing as negative interest rates. You know, you borrow money, you lend money to get a return financially. So there is no such thing as a negative interest rate. That's like anti-life. Anti-life means you're dead. There's no such thing as anti-life. Either you're alive or you're not. So once you go negative, it's very, very difficult to come back from that. You know, negative interest rates mean that I lend Lisa $100,000, okay, and I owe Lisa money because the interest on that $100,000 is negative. So I literally owe her money. When she pays me back, she has to pay me back less than $100,000 in order for me to cover the money that I owed her when I lent her the money. It's absolutely negative financial sense. That's the only negative there is in common sense. So when you raise rates and try and get out of the negative rate situation, when you raise rates on a bond, the price of the bond goes which direction, Bill?
It goes down.
So if you're negative, right, and you raise it, it goes down faster and further. And you have to raise it because it's negative. So when those bonds go down, exactly, when those bonds go down in value, whoever purchased those bonds are in trouble. Now, if it's sovereign debt that is negative, and then the central bank forces all the other money center banks to hold that sovereign debt, and it's negative yielding, when they try and raise rates, that debt that the banks are holding as tier one collateral, basically the collateral that is used as supposed to be the safest, it's devalued, which means the entire banking system is devalued. You could change the rules and change definitions all you want. At the end of the day, people are losing money. It doesn't really matter you know, what color makeup you put on the hippopotamus, it's a hippopotamus, and it's irrelevant. So
Reggie, let me add one point to that. I was in Portugal for probably a month. Traveled the entire country. Amazing country. In meeting the young people, ended up playing soccer one night, some guys, that was fun. But you're chatting with the young people. There's no life in the face of the young person. Why is there no life in the face of the young person? Because the government, through what Reggie just talked about, negative interest rates, God knows what fiscal policies, right? I looked at a few of them in the last decade or so. And then I grabbed dinner that night, and I was talking to the restaurant owner. And he said, Bill, when we went to the euro, that was the knife in the heart. That's what killed us. We lost 50%, and the economy just went on to this kind of slippery slope down. That was in the late 90s. Wow. So when you destroy the next generation through debt, the growth of government, fascism, socialism, you're basically telling the young people you have no future. So what do the young people do? They go to school, go to college, and they just leave, and they go to Finland, Sweden. They go to other places. The human capital is leaving. So how could you have a productive future system when your innovative young minds are fleeing the country?
Right, you gave up on your own country.
Yeah, so like fiat systems are flawed on so many different levels. And the reality is peer-to-peer systems are the future. It's the only way to create and innovate and give humanity an opportunity to live a better life. The longer we live in centrally planned systems, the greater we stay at 10% or below capacity as human beings. That's my belief. I think there's so much opportunity. We have no idea what these economies can be in the future because we've never had the opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, you called Bitcoin the positive black swan in another interview that I watched recently. My concern is, legacy finance trying to work their evil ways into that beautiful black swan, positive black swan system through things like these ETFs, recreating a derivative system. What do you think about all, grayscale, the ETFs, those kind of things affecting Bitcoin and cryptocurrency markets?
Well, the best analogy I can give you is gold, right? So we were buying gold at the oldest private bank in Switzerland in 2002. The reason why we held our gold there is because we didn't want to own gold in America. We know the history of gold in the United States. And so Switzerland to us was kind of the safest place to custody gold on behalf of our investors. And the next 10 to 15 years, and Reggie knows this story, I mean, there are numerous accusations of banks and central banks, the great quote by Greenspan, where they could lease gold and basically work with Wall Street to suppress the real price of gold. So we've never really had price discovery on gold, right? Because central banks, being large owners of gold, and their various investment bank partners can lease that gold and could create this paper gold. And Reggie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think JP Morgan's had to pay a couple $2 billion in fines the last 20 years, right, involved in gold manipulation. And there's other banks and investment banks here and in the UK. So you've never had price discovery in gold. That's a fact. So now that Wall Street's trying to infiltrate the Bitcoin market, and there are Bitcoin derivatives that trade that Wall Street has got their fingers in, they can probably play a role around the edges in trying to limit its appreciation. But as more and more people take delivery of that Bitcoin, cold storage, et cetera, it becomes a much more difficult game for them. Remember, the central bank was the owners of lots of gold 20 years ago, and so they could lease the gold out. Mm-hmm. And there was some there. In the case of Bitcoin, if more and more people pull Bitcoin off of exchanges or wallets, it's a little more challenging. I do think that as the peer-to-peer economy unfolds and better architecture is built, better protocols, better systems, it really won't matter. In other words, the innovation will out-innovate what Wall Street wants to try and do with it. And Wall Street's still going to have their role, and they're going to be playing games like they always do, and lending and borrowing and so forth. That'll continue. The peer-to-peer system, I'm hoping that it develops better architecture and better sets of incentives and governance, such that when we rebuild the system or set of systems, it dwarfs. No one will even want to participate in the old set of systems. And that, that's over the next 5, 10, 15 years.
So do you see digital assets and CBDCs, kind of this transition? Do you see that coexisting like in perpetuity, or will people transition completely to a peer-to-peer?
Well, I think you'll have a subset of people that just don't really want to think about it. They're going to go on with their lives and deal with whatever the money that's being used and so on, right? Look at the Eurozone. Reggie's a great example. I mean, you think the Italians really want to use the euro, or the Portuguese, the Spaniards want to use the euro? No, they've got a gun to their head. They're forced to use it. I think CBDCs are going to eventually happen. One of the draconian things I think that could potentially happen is they could pay you no interest on a CBDC, right? Here the government is rolling over $33 trillion of debt at 5% plus. How's that sustainable when the tax revenue started rolling over 6-7 months ago? So you could see a CBDC, and at the same time, if you're forced to own it or you get it, you're not receiving any interest on it. I just think that digital assets, I mean, people again will want to hold something hard as opposed to this, manufactured digital money out of thin air. And you'll have two worlds. You'll have the world where people just live in the CBDC, get their Social Security checks, what have you. And then you're going to have a whole slew of people just kind of build peer-to-peer systems and work with entrepreneurs. So it'll be a much more clear example of people moving to something that's real and more people just giving up. As sad as that is, I think that's kind of the road that we're on right now.
I want to comment on that.
Yeah,
so
please do.
The stable coin / CBDC that wouldn't pay interest is analogous to Circle's USDC or Tether's USDT. And the reason why that should not be able to pay interest is because it's essentially a loan. With Circle, you send $100 million to Circle. They or Coinbase mints $100 million of USDC, and then Circle takes your money and invests it. According to Circle, they buy short-term treasuries. Not going to get into discussion whether they do or not, but assuming that they do, when they buy those treasuries, they're basically lending the money out to the government. Okay, and you don't get paid interest on it. Circle does, or Circle and Coinbase does. Coinbase and Circle are partners in the USDC, mechanism. So if you were to take USDC and lend it to somebody, right, to get paid interest on it, you've just rehypothecated the original assets. You have two sets of loans on one set of collateral. In case something goes wrong, somebody's not getting paid, mathematically guaranteed. Okay. Now, the dollar is different. You say that a lot of people say the dollar is not backed by anything. It is backed by the full faith and whatever the second term is. It slips my mind.
Full faith and credit of our government.
Right. Okay, so
I'm trying not to laugh, Reggie.
The full faith and credit of the government. Fancy terms, synonyms for guns, basically. Okay. And guns take a different connotation in 2023. Most warfare is done cybernetically through social media, psyops, manipulation, malware, worms, etc. Think Stuxnet, etc. I know it was that Stuxnet was an Israeli operation, but I have a strong personal feeling that that's American intel ops at work. But totally different conversation. I don't want to get into that. This has nothing to do with Israel or any other country. It has to do with how war is fought. Okay, so when I mention certain facts, a lot of times it gets sucked into a conversation that has nothing to do with even the ideologies I'm trying to discuss. War is fought right now, for the most part, cybernetically and through social psyops, such as using social media. Okay. With that being said, the US is very, very good at it. So the dollar does have backing. Now, whether that serves you well or not when you use a dollar is a different conversation. But you can take a CBDC dollar and you can lend it and you can get paid on it, because at least technically there is no debt behind it to begin with. Okay, the full faith and credit of the government is not a loan. Okay, so you could take a CBDC. I can lend it to Lisa and say, Lisa, you owe me 3% or 10% in 1 year. Okay, Lisa pays me back with the 10%. If Lisa defaults, I'm out of the money, but I'm not out of twice the principal because there's no other debt on it, just the debt that I sent to Lisa. With USDC, with USDT, or a CBDC that was based on debt, purely on debt, if you lend it, you have profit. You've already, used the collateral twice. You have one set of collateral. So that's the basic structural difference between an asset-backed stablecoin, a USDC, or consider a stablecoin, and a stablecoin that is asset-backed with an actual asset that is not debt. So the asset-backed stablecoins, the asset is not really an asset, it's a liability-backed stablecoin. That's USDC, that's USDT. Okay, CBDCs, even though it might seem ephemeral what the backing is, it is not a debt, it's not a liability. Okay, so if you're going to build a CBDC system, or any stablecoin system, it's best to back it with something that's not a liability, so the owners of the new token can actually use that as a dollar replacement or euro replacement or yen replacement. So they can invest it, they can make loans with it, etc. Any loan that's made with it, again, is rehypothecation. I'll land my plane there because
I would just add one thing to what Reggie said. I've lost count of how many dollars have been created the last 3 years. I mean, ever since COVID, it's just been like a whirlwind. But the point is, there's another crisis and then another crisis, and the central banks respond collectively, I might add, the same way, which is just creating more money.
Right.
And so these systems, it's almost like the heroin addict, right? They start a little bit and then they want more and more and more, and it takes, at some point, the heroin addict's got so much heroin in his body that they eventually die. And I really think that's where we are. I think we're at the point now where the central planners globally, not just pointing at the US, globally have made lots of promises to their citizens, and there's no way to make good on those. And so, which fiat currency goes to money heaven first, and second and third, we can have that discussion. But it's we're at the end of the road. And gold, I mean, people buy gold because gold's been money for 5,000 years. And while I can't deliver $1 million of gold to Reggie today because we're far away, I mean, I probably could, be a little bit of work. Bitcoin proved that for the first time we could do it peer to peer and not have the settlement risk that Reggie was talking about earlier, and then that value could be subsequently sent to someone else, within 10 minutes. So we've proven that we can cryptographically take value and go peer to peer. And now we've had a series of kind of wallet experiments. Uphold is one, and there's a number of others. And then there's been these various digital assets created, and then these protocols and various characteristics of those protocols. I mean, we're at the point now where you're getting network effect, right? In certain aspects of the protocol wars. We don't really know, let's be frank, we really don't know who the winners are going to be, but value is subjective. and Reggie and I like gold, but the guy down the street, he just wants oil. And Lisa, you're in Oklahoma. You just believe that your family loves natural gas. You want to own natural gas as a store of value. So that's what makes the peer-to-peer world so beautiful. Choice, value, subjective.
Yeah, and the ability to sidestep currency as a go-between.
Yeah.
If you like gold and she likes oil or gas, and you have gas and she has gold, you don't have to go through the US dollar. You don't have to go through the euro.
That's right.
Direct barter. That was the initial premise when I started 2013.
Yeah, and Reggie, what that does, it just opens up this whole new world of, your wallet, Reggie, may differ from Lisa's or Lisa's children or family, and you have this very dynamic set of interactions that could happen. We've never been able to experience anything remotely close to that. Right? If Reggie and I own a brewery and we're brewing beer and we've got overhead and people and so forth, but we want to exchange part of the brewery for another business interest that you might have. You've got to go through lawyers. You've got to go through accountants. I mean, it's a deterrent, really, for this idea of capital exchange and capital formation. So then, by default, we rush back to the bank and the lawyer, and then they take 10 or 20% after, in the time delays and so forth. How is that a free, open, dynamic, entrepreneurial set of systems? It's not.
Right. And so some of this really affects the adoption of this process. As this old system is dying, we see the new way. We see the peer-to-peer and, Bitcoin or people being able to tokenize assets and be able to transact. Can you you do a lot in the tech world with finding solutions to difficulties. Can you talk a little bit about, there seems to be a big discussion or differing of opinion on open source versus IP. And, at Veritaseum, we really value IP and protecting people's IP. You can choose to make it open source, but protecting IP, we believe, is really important. Can you kind of give us your thoughts on that, Bill, and what you see in the future for those?
Yeah, I think IP owners should be protected. I mean, they've spent an inordinate amount of their time, their energy, their intellectual capacity doing something, right? Had they not been doing that and pursuing something else, I mean, it's either a wasted opportunity or another set of limitations, right? So IP should be protected. There's many technology companies here and abroad with patents that are, laundry lists, right? Many, many patents. Those patent holders receive royalties. The mobile phone industry is one example. The financial technology industry, another set of examples. Look at the pharmaceutical industry, and we go on down the list. So while open source is great in that it continues to kind of conjure up these new ideas, technologies, processes, IP, you're going to have to protect IP. Otherwise, I think what happens is you end up in this wheel where open source keeps spinning, and yet you really don't get a set of standards or adoption and real permanent capital. I hate to keep going back to this, but I talked to Reggie about this a long time ago. Like, the idea of creating new systems, first and foremost, it should be built on some layers of permanent capital, whether that capital is human capital, financial capital. There has to be some foundation built around this. And to me, like, when I think about all of this new cryptography, intellectual property and those rights and that creation or set of creations that's foundational. That's part of the permanent capital. And then you start, it's like building a nice high rise, right? We're going to have the land. We're going to have a foundation. We're going to have to bring in engineers. We're going to have to make all this permanent. And then we can start layering in floors and other types of interesting technologies. But you have to have intellectual property respected and protected.
Thank you. Reggie, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to pose just a thought exercise. What is open source, Lisa, as you understand it? It's not a, you know, a lawyer test. You know, you're not.
Yeah. No, I'm making us all shirts that says I'm not a lawyer for the next interview. Yeah. But
there's some lawyers you should give that to, but different conversation.
I'll spread them around after I copyright them. Yeah. No. So it's my understanding that open source is like a platform or space where technologies or ideas can be shared or built upon to, you know, create or improve other ideas. So,
okay, are those ideas that are shared and built upon, are they sold or given for free in open source?
Given for free and not owned by anyone.
Okay, so how do you enforce it?
There is no enforcement, is my understanding. It's kind of like a big hippie love fest of technology, of like you choose to partake or not.
Okay, so
like a consensus of the group would make something happen or not.
Okay, so you open source. I see a picture of Lisa there. You know, beautiful woman in the upper my left-hand corner. We screenshot this. You say it's open source. Okay, and then I take this picture because it's a beautiful picture, and I decide to sell it for $30 a screenshot. Is it still open source?
Well, my image should be, that's a whole constitutional argument, isn't it? That my image, my voice, it should be my property, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that should not be open source because my image, my voice, my identity or whatever should be protected by the Constitution, is my understanding.
Now, suppose you decide to open source it. You say, I want people to have free access to my beauty. Okay, so you decide to open source it. Right. You tell everybody, I'm going to open this book. This is mine. I'm going to open source it. But because it's free, I decide to take it and I sell it anyway on eBay. Is it still open source?
Yes.
Okay. So in order for you to open source something, you have to take ownership and control over your property. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then since it's yours and you have ownership and control over it, you decide whether it's free or not. And you decide who can sell it and who can't. And that's what makes it open source. So attempting to have the open source movement as antithetical to intellectual property ownership shows that people don't understand what intellectual property and intellectual property ownership is. You cannot open source something without taking control of it.
Without or else claiming it.
Someone like Reggie can come along, or Bill, you know, one of those, you know, dastardly finance guys come and they could just sell it because it's free and there are no rules around it. So
but maybe that is the plan, is to get them to think that, leave it, don't ever register your idea, don't ever claim it so that somebody else can.
But if you look at open source contracts, look at the MIT license and the BSD license and a lot of the Linux Foundation license, the open source contracts, actually, they're not one paragraph. You know, the licenses are rather long and very explicit, and they delineate the rights and specificity. What this is, who owns it, what you can do, what you cannot do. Free software with open source licenses make it very clear. This does not belong to you. You have a license to use it. Oftentimes, you can use it, but you can't. Any improvements you make have to be given back to the community. Or you cannot sell this. Okay? Or you can sell improvements you make to it, but you can't sell the base code or any variation. And the point is, in order to do any of that, you have to recognize as IP, and you have to recognize an owner and be able to enforce it. And without doing any of that, you can't have an open source contract. So if you're in favor of open source code or ideas, you're a strong proponent of IP ownership. Most people in the open source community have no idea that they're pushing and backing intellectual property rights, because facts be damned. Again, you know, when you start having factual conversations, you'll leave a lot of people behind. But it does help to actually look at what happens in real life and the actual truth, as Bill said, which will cause, you know, COVID, you know, 23. Everybody breaks out the truth. The truth. You can't handle the truth. I hope you remember that quote, because that was a good movie, right?
That was a great movie, yeah. Oh,
yeah, one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, speaking of IP, I wanted to kind of close this on a really positive, note. You know, the Veritaseum patents now have been cited more than 108 times. I didn't look this morning, but the number seems to be jumping up every time we look.
On Tuesdays.
On Tuesdays, is that the day to look?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tuesdays are when the updates go through the USPTO.
Oh, thank you for telling me that. Okay, well, I'll be sure to look every Tuesday. So I noticed last time I looked it was 108, but I will look again. It's recognized. They're recognized in both U.S. and Japan. What would be, Bill? What would be your very good idea to do something good in the world? When we spoke earlier, when you visited the VeriDAO, and we had the privilege of talking with you, you have this heart for, you know, justice and to do good in the world. And so what would you do with the Veritaseum patent to be your very good idea to do something in the world?
Well, I think what you do is you take this patent technology and you marry that to the architecture that is going to essentially allow, you know, millions and millions of people to essentially operate in a truly decentralized world, and do it in ways that, you know, has to be grandma simple. Do it in ways where, you know, we're not going to read about $3 billion of bridge hacks, right, that subsequently happened. Do it in ways that allows us to it empowers us to be the humans that we really are, to do the things that we want to do. We spend the bulk of our days as human beings, whether we're Americans or Chinese or someone sitting in Japan, through layers of coercion. We're essentially coerced into doing this or coerced into doing that. We have very limited time to do the things that we should be doing with our friends and our family and so forth. So my idea is you take this patent technology, you marry it to architecture that could essentially create a real peer-to-peer system. Ways by which we're spending our time, our reputation, our skill sets, our energy in areas, networks, projects, etc., that will make the world a better place. You know, Reggie's a father, you're a mother, I'm a father. I can't, knowing what we know about the world, I can't sit idle and not do something for the next generation. It's really, that's it. I mean, if we sit knowing what we all know, if we do nothing, we're not only penalizing our children, we're penalizing their children. So we have the technology. We've already proven that the technology can actually facilitate many of the things that we've discussed on this interview. We now have to take all these experiments that we've seen in the crypto world, and we have to deliver it instead of architecture, systems that will allow us to truly be free and sovereign. That's what I want to do.
I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you. We can find you on Twitter at Bill_Laggner with 2 G's. Reggie, do you have any closing comments for us?
I'm very skeptical of I'm measuring my words. It's too much litigation, right? I'm very skeptical on how the economy globally is being portrayed versus what I actually see.
Okay.
Stock pickers are going out of business because no matter how good you are, you know, markets are being pushed up. So getting bad stocks, which takes a decent amount of resources and time, it's irrelevant because the price is going up. Getting good stocks, it's irrelevant because they're going up with the bad stocks. The S&P 500 has been on a tear. It's been wrecking short sellers who had a legitimate reason to be bearish and short certain sectors. But two factoids before I close, just to put this in perspective, and then also to realize that decentralized finance and crypto is a technology. It is not an asset class. Now, there are aspects of the technology that people buy and sell and trade, and that may be asset class. But as my son, who's now teaching himself machine learning for the last couple of years, realizes that technology is much larger than finance. Finance is simply a way of expressing technology, buying and selling things, but technology itself is larger. China, the world's second largest economy, so far, I don't know how long that might stand to be true, is in a significant backslide. You know, they have an aging economy. For whatever reason, somebody decided to limit children to only one child, and the preference was that child was male. And last time I checked, boys don't do well having babies, so you're going to basically have a shrinking population. Non-performing assets, non-performing liabilities, overpriced real property, lots of stagnant debt in the system, etc. You know, global inflation. China is sliding hard. When China slides, all countries and economies that rely on China is going to slide with it. Okay, Europe, I have no idea why anybody's not bearish on Europe in general. And then you have the US. Our market pricing is just insane. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I was commenting on the everything bubble, and then prices ameliorated a little bit, and now they're back to everything rising. Everything's rising. Carvana, which seems to have a failed business model, released refinancing, and the price shot up. I didn't go through the documents, but I just glanced at just a tweet that outlined it. They had debt that they couldn't pay. So they refinanced that debt by having a new debt offering denominated in the debt they couldn't pay. It's a paid-in-kind debt instrument, and paid-in-kind means we're going to pay you exactly in kind, exactly what it is that you're holding. So if you have a loan that you couldn't pay, and then you get a new loan, but that new loan is denominated in the loan that you couldn't pay, you still haven't solved your problem. And the new loan, denominated in loan that you couldn't pay, was financed by a new equity offering of the worthless stock that was being devalued in the first place. Now, and the stock went up after this.
Isn't that what just happened with Argentina?
It happens with usually everything right
And
before
they defaulted?
it goes up.
Yeah.
These financial machinations, financial engineering, listen, if you have to go through all that, the business is not sound. Okay? And Carvana seems to be a failed business model. It sounds cool, but apparently it's not working. When the market cannot price this stuff accurately, okay, there's a big, big problem. Everything is going up. Okay? Interest rates are going up, okay, but you still have the everything bubble. This does not look like it's going to end well, but the central banks and everybody else seem to be doing everything they can to prevent the actual collapse. Now, a lot of people are going to come to the other side and say, well, they're raising rates. At the beginning of the year, I said I would bet a significant amount of my resources that the Federal Reserve was going to triangle before one fiscal year. So it is now August 1st, okay? By the first quarter next year, I can guarantee you not only will they stop raising rates, they may even reverse. And I don't mean a 10% chance, much greater than that. If that's the case, well, then they're crying uncle. And we're going right back to the situation that Bill was discussing. Profligate money supply increase. And I mean profligate, because they've increased the money supply many times over, multiple fold. This boom.
Reggie, let me. So Mark Faber, who's a wonderful market historian, macro guy. Mark started publishing our work, 2005, and his most recent report, which I can send both of you, basically saying that U.S. government spending is now growing at 15% year over year. Think about that, right? So we've got the whole COVID things in the rearview mirror, yet government spending is accelerating. I'll give you an idea. The government spending was growing at 8% a year from 2001 to 2020. So for 19 years, the real economy grew at about 3.5, 3.75. Population 1.5% roughly, and then you had government growing at 8. Now we're growing at 15. So to Reggie's point, I think the markets feel that the central banks are going to start lowering interest rates, let them eat cake, and people are more comfortable overpaying for a stock and owning that versus owning dollars or euros or pounds or yen or renminbi. That's the world I think we're going into. As frightening as that is, I think it's the reality of where we are. And we can thank Ben Bernanke for all of that. That's the badge that he has to carry.
The great Frankenstein macro experiment.
Will that be the tipping point of the hyperinflation, or would that be connected with that?
Yeah, I don't believe hyperinflation can occur with the holder of the global reserve currency, because you have to have it. In order to do business globally, you have to use US dollars, and you don't have a choice. So the price of the dollar, the price of the dollar falls, but you have a built-in put option because everybody has to buy it to buy and sell oil or gold or wheat or food globally.
Well, Japan was selling US treasuries recently to prop up their yen, and with BRICS coming online and all that, and so many countries joining BRICS, I really thought that we would see a de-dollarization or decline in the use of the dollar globally.
I mean, you might see that in subtle moves, but to see that, you can ask yourself, this is a real-time litmus paper test. How many yen do you have in your portfolio?
I don't have any. Yeah.
How about Riyal? Rupees?
No.
So, and you can ask your friends, and many of them will probably say the same thing. So it's very difficult for the global reserve currency to hyperinflate. Very difficult, because
what they could, what they could do is what they did with the Eurozone, right? That you just wake up and you still have the dollar, but it's worth 25% less, and they've got this new system they've rolled out, new trading blocks and new tax, and then that happens. That's it. So that's not hyperinflation, just an overnight kind of resetting of the monetary order.
But that's going to hurt Europe. It won't hurt the US, because the US does it all the time, but they can't. Okay, that's like, the big 250-pound muscle-bound guy. He can walk around smacking people because he can beat everybody. But when the 90-pound guy goes and does it, it doesn't work out well for him. So when the US reprices everything, right, it exports inflation to everybody else. Okay, the US can afford it, Europe can't. Many of the Asian nations, the BRICS, etc. So when the US when the US sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. Now that ends when the US is no longer the global reserve currency holder, but that's when, and that's not right now. When that would be, different conversation, but it's not August 1st, 2023.
Yeah.
I'm going to close off there because I have to go and try and make some Riyal, renminbi, anything.
I see. Well, I appreciate both of you so much. You guys can follow Reggie on Twitter at Reggie Middleton, and please like and share this video. Follow us at DAO_Veri on Twitter. Join us on the Telegram Very official group to join a community and a chat, and find all the links in the description below. Like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and have a very good day. Thanks.